Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Managing Director of Elcat Global.
Delighted to be joined today by Magne Setnes, who is the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Heineken. Magne has had a very, very long career in Heineken, and typically with people like him, I like to joke that he's the reason why people like us, headhunters, go out of business, because he's only worked with Heineken. He started with the company about 20 plus years ago as a scientist. So there's a story in there that I'll ask Magne, and then he moved slowly into supply chain, slowly but surely. He worked in supply chain across a multitude of jobs, different continents, different countries. He also had commercial roles, P&L, country P&L, regional P&L roles, and now Chief Supply Chain Officer. So Magne, thanks for taking the time. Welcome.
Thank you, Radu. I'm sorry to make your life hard, but the beauty of working in a company like Heineken is that you get a lot of opportunities and a lot of different challenges, and every new role feels like a different job. So I guess that's why I stayed so long.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. But maybe tell us a little bit. Let's start with your personal story, right? And tell us where the interesting part, I saw your education was very much on the technical side. You started as scientist and then you moved into supply chain, right? So what happened there? Tell us about the inflection points, I guess, in your career.
Well, yeah, Rado, this was maybe an unusual start. I was doing my PhD in artificial intelligence techniques, and I was recruited by Heineken after that to work on big data. This was in January 2000, and so big data was on our mind then and still is. I think, like everybody else, we're really trying to figure it out still. And my first day on the job, actually, the project got cancelled, and I ended up doing something completely different. I ended up doing business model, productivity models for Heineken. And having done that for a while, I got put into a more commercially oriented role. So, it was maybe a bit of a bumpy start, but a very fun start. It kind of took me right out of my scientific environment and I ended up doing completely different things. So, yeah, that is how I enrolled in the company and I've been there since. And this is now 22 years ago.
Yeah. And look, you were also studying artificial intelligence when this wasn't cool, yeah? Not like today. So today
The, 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 Radu, the nice thing about it back in the day is that myself, like many others, we didn't really know what we were doing. So, the field was full of opportunities, and I think it still is.
No, I need to. Actually, I'll connect you separately. Frank is a very good friend of mine, Frank Stegger. So he's the chief supply chain officer of Schaeffler, which is an automotive OEM. Very similar story. In a sense, his background is also technical. He was artificial intelligence 20 years ago, and now he's head of supply chain. And he was also telling me very interesting stories about that. So I think you will enjoy. Now, back to today's conversation and back to today's topic. How about Heineken supply chain? Tell us a little bit about, I think chaos is the word, or challenge on a daily basis is the word. Tell us a little bit about how you experience today.
Well, maybe just a few words on Heineken. I mean, we are a large brewer and we operate globally. So we are, have operations in about 80 markets around the world, but we supply more or less every market globally. And our supply chain is a very distributed setup. And altogether, we produce in that supply chain 231 million hectoliters of beer each year. So we're the second biggest brewer. Now, we like to talk in hectoliters. Now, just for you to understand how much beer that is, it's about 145,000 glasses of beer every minute, every day throughout the year. So I'm happy to see that beer is the most beloved drink on the planet. With that, we have about 13% share of the global beer market. So you can just imagine how much beer people are consuming. So it's an interesting business to be in. And one of the things when you've seen the disruptions that have happened, one of the things we have gone back and forth in Heineken is about our setup, our footprint, because we are very distributed. We have many plants, and as we saw the pandemic hitting us, as we have seen the disruptions that followed from that, our widespread footprint has been a good advantage for us. So we have been throughout this time, we've been able to keep our customers well in stock and have not had too many disruptions from the supply chain. It's been quite hard work, I must say, but we've been able and we've learned much better than before to really leverage and to manage a network of production plants and a network of suppliers in order to make sure that we can switch quickly the SKU portfolios and that we can switch supply lines and that we could take advantage of some of those opportunities that were there when shipping lines were open and when containers were available. And last but not least, we do produce very close to market, which has helped us a lot as well in throughout this time. And when you look back in history, we've been discussing many times, what is the optimal setup of our network? Should we be more centralized? Should we try to leverage scale a little bit more by having more bigger plants and less of the smaller plants? But we've always been struggling with this. And we've seen that the advantages of being close to market has really come true, especially in these last few years. So yeah, I can say it's been quite a ride, actually. I started this job just as COVID hit. Before that, I was a general manager in a big European operation, and COVID hit us, and we had to kind of secure that and take care of the people and reduce shifts and care about the customers. And then when that was kind of stabilized, I moved into this job as chief supply chain officer, and it was an interesting time to start because I found myself in isolation, and it was difficult to travel and to stay in contacts with large groups of people. But we managed, also learning to use much more than before all the digital means that we have at our disposal for communication and so on.
No, absolutely. Need is the mother of all learning or necessity. I know that we were talking offline, and a good moment now to discuss further and love your input on the Internet of Things IoT platform that you developed at Heineken in concurrence with your supply chain, and how that helps you aggregate and distill data. And maybe tell us a little bit more about that, Magne.
Yeah, Radu, I think we had, as everybody, we've been looking at, what is Industry 4.0 going to be for us? How can we leverage data better? And throughout our widespread network globally, and with about 180 different breweries and production plants, we are always faced with what you can call the installed base, right? So, the dream of everybody would be to just flip a switch and then you're on the latest technology. But when you're dealing with an installed base and that is that widespread, you have several considerations to take. And what we discovered was that many of our suppliers of equipment were offering us great solutions, but very often they were concentrated to work perfectly with their equipment, with their machines. And we felt the need that there is more than just optimizing individual machines. We really want to take a look at our production processes in our breweries more end to end. So we didn't find that solution in the market, and we wanted to have something that was really supplier agnostic. So this is how we came to develop this IoT platform, which we call the Connected Brewery, and which takes a bit of a different approach. We did not start with saying, let's create a digital twin and get in all the data and then decide what to do with it. We started from the point of view of our operators in the breweries. So we see that their daily work is getting more and more complex. There's a lot of changes in portfolio. There's more rapid changeovers on the production lines, and there's ever new machines coming in, and you kind of have a mixed setup of old machines, new machines, and technologies are evolving. And what we then started to think of is like, how can we make their life better? How can we help them on the shop floor to have the data available and have the operating procedures available that they need, when they need it, where they need it, and at the same time help them in what we call failure detection and solving problems like little stoppages or quality issues or bad performing production lines. So this was our starting point, and building on that, we set out to identify 3 so-called lighthouse breweries. So these were breweries that we selected because of their current performance and because of their technical expertise to help us develop what we call use cases. So we took specific problems that occurred in those breweries, and that we then also assumed, and we were right in that assumption, that these will be typical problems that would occur everywhere. So, and then we created solutions to address those problems. And these solutions we created around a cloud platform that leveraged data that we took from all sensors and actuators and PID controllers on the production side. So we took the data that we needed, put that on a cloud platform, and on that cloud platform, we developed the applications, you can say, for the operators. Now, the nice thing about that is that you develop a solution together with the users in one of these lighthouse plants, and then afterwards you can kind of deploy this almost like an app store to all the other breweries. So those that have installed our connected brewery kit are now able to take the solutions which are programmed for their everyday problem from this cloud platform and instantly apply it. And the nice thing about that is that in the beginning, we would kind of from the center determine what solutions to develop. But now we see that the power of our network is coming into play. And we have people in Mexico developing solutions that they then put up on the platform. And then you have operators in Vietnam seeing that and saying, hey, we have the same problem. Let's take this solution and let's apply it. So we are able, through this approach, to create quite a lot of standard on a set of not standardized machines, because the problems, the solutions that the operators are looking for are more or less universal.
And I guess there's the forever debate of what you did, which was develop it yourself, versus buy, right? And get a solution that already exists. So if we were to double click a little bit, Magne, what were some of the pluses? And I'm sure there's some minuses as well. And what are some of the minuses of doing it this way, right? In which you basically created this internally inside Heineken. Pluses, minuses.
I would say that the pluses for us is, being supplier agnostic when it comes to machines, right? So you can take your OEM machine producers and ask them for line monitoring systems, but they will work very well with some machines and not so well with others. So from the get-go, we wanted something that was really agnostic, and we couldn't really find it. Now, another way of doing that could be to go to a software supplier who would say, I might have a solution for you, but we didn't find the right tooling that was looking at the operators as a center for the applications and the use cases that you solve. And we really wanted to have people at the center. And we found that can say a lot of focus around these digital twins. So, just let's get a lot of data. Let's then, make a model of the whole thing and then start looking for applications to it. And to us, that was too much heavy lifting in the beginning, and it took too long to get to the results. Maybe that's some of the pluses. Last but not least, it's really engaging for the people. Right. So our teams themselves are really involved in doing this, and not to talk about the cost is another advantage. I would say if you look at downsides of this, maybe it's a little bit about know-how. We need to upskill and continuously make sure that we have people available that can do this for us. And we are not a IoT software company. We are a beer brewer. So, attracting the right people, making sure that we have those skills in-house and that we also can offer a career for people with this background is something that we are continuously looking at, because we know we need to pay attention to that. Maybe also kind of rollout speed. So some things go very fast, but then we're also dependent on our own people a lot for the deployment of this. So we don't have large troops ready to focus on this. So the resourcing you have to pay a lot of attention to, because you cannot just turn it on and off. Like when you use an external provider, you can leverage their base. So maybe I would say that is a bit of a potential downside, and making sure that the platform does not become obsolete, because there's a certain danger that you stay too focused on your own things and you don't stay open enough to receive input from the external world. So also something that we make sure that does not happen. So being in constant communication also with our other partners, with our machine suppliers, and also with the outside world, to make sure you don't end up in isolation. And we've also looked at, we're sharing this platform with others. So it's not something that we are keeping secret, and we are working with some big companies also for the cloud solutions. So they are also featuring this platform in many of their communications. So in that way, we also make sure that we get some input from the outside world, because maybe in the end that is the most dangerous thing, that you end up making something that becomes too narrow.
Yeah, thanks for keeping it real. There's always pluses, minuses. Now, on the point that you mentioned with this, let's say the volume of resources to deploy, I'll just challenge a little bit from my experience that whilst indeed there's companies that are specialized in this, I've heard countless, whilst maybe I shouldn't name, examples of where also external companies have screwed up beautifully implementation. So it's not necessarily that the external ones sometimes don't make a mess of it. And also having that control internally of exactly who and how to deploy can actually be a benefit. So
Yeah,
just on that.
I think rather we are super happy with the solution that we have chosen and developed, and our rollout is going full speed. Been at it for a while now, and our goal is to add all of our plans globally onto this. It also create a fantastic solution, or you can say a fantastic platform for data analytics, right? So, one of my educational backgrounds from long ago, but, we now start seeing that we are getting a lot of interesting information that we can start mining. And since the information is collected and built up around use cases, meaning that it's actually addressing actual problems, or say weaknesses in the productivity of a plant, the data analytics leads to instant solutions of common problems. So, this is an extra value for us that we are seeing now. And on resource side, I think everybody's fighting with this at the moment, right? Any company that I talk to, external suppliers or partners in this industry, they're all having the same issues at the moment.
Yeah, we discussed a little bit, and I want to go more into the details of another initiative that you had in the supply chain. And it's been a lot talked about 3D printing. I haven't quite seen as many case studies, and I think you have a great one to share. So tell us more about how you use 3D printing in your supply chain for spare parts.
Yeah, we as I said, have a very big network of breweries, and we came to the kind of brutal conclusion that when we build a brewery, we buy equipment from our suppliers. We more or less buy almost, we say jokingly, one and a half brewery, right? So it's a bit of a joke, but it's also at the same time, it is true that we then also get a production line, we get machines in place, and we buy a lot of spare parts also to kind of build up the spare part inventories, because you need to be ready for downtimes wherever it is in the world to solve them quickly. You have operations in all corners of the world, and the technical expertise and the spare parts are not always available. So we started looking at this, and we found that there are various ways of doing it. You could consolidate kind of spare part inventories and try to do different hubs and these things. But you could also say, hey, what is almost spare part free world? How would that look like? That would mean that you need to have just instantly available, out of the sky, dropping a spare part when you needed it. And this is how we came to 3D printing. So also very much accelerated by the COVID situation. We had started looking at it earlier, but it was very much accelerated. We installed 3D printers in many of our breweries, and then we did this together with our machine suppliers. So big machine suppliers for us would then put available their spare part inventory, say in the cloud, to put it like that, and our 3D printers will be connected to this. So it's kind of like an online shop almost, and we would go in and select from them, and we would pay on use. Typically, these spare parts then will be printed and produced in a matter of hours, and we could use them, and they were designed and developed together with our suppliers. So they had some kind of quality stamp that they would really work. The wear and tear of these parts is different than the original spare parts that you get machined from the factories. So the parts were for kind of a temporary period while the actual part was being packed and shipped to us. So in this way, we were able to reduce our downtimes and saying like, okay, spare part from the sky, just for a temporary period of time, and while we wait for the actual part to come. And this has worked very well for us. And I think key here is to work well with your suppliers, and also to say, we're not out there to start producing all these parts ourselves and take away that revenue. We actually want the part from you, but we just need it quicker. So how can you work together to solve that problem? And we've had times where we have been looking at this maybe wrongly and saying like, hey, maybe we should produce all our parts ourselves and try to make a business case out of that. But this works very, very well for us. We've been able to reduce our inventory of spare parts. We've been able to increase the uptime of our lines, and the collaboration with our suppliers is excellent. Now, I will not say that our teams are not being creative. So when you put a 3D printer at the disposal of a lot of creative people, there will also be creative solutions. So it's also interesting to see some of the things that come up where parts are being created to solve problems, new parts that are not available. And also in this case, they are being shared in our network. So if somebody has a brilliant idea in one brewery to make a device that can be used on a conveyor to improve the flow somehow, I tell you, the other guys are very quick to pick it up. So also a good example of how you can use the power of a network to really create good solutions for everybody.
Just don't 3D print the beer, okay?
We are not there yet. Don't worry.
So I have quite a few questions that came in on the topic of learning and collaboration, and I love that's a theme that came very strongly throughout. And I'll jump to that. But before, one question and one big challenge that most companies, and especially in FMCG, are faced with are the commodity prices. And this has come through a few listeners. How do you deal with that in today's world, Magne? I mean, inflation is something that everybody's concerned about. The prices have gone up through the roofs, plus certain things are not available, right? We have the war in Ukraine and Russia, which again disrupts significantly certain commodities. What's your take on that?
Well, Radu, if I knew exactly how to solve this, I don't think I'd be talking to you.
You would be an economist, yes.
But it is a bit of a sad situation, to say the least. And one thing is the prices, another thing is the human suffering that we are seeing. So while we try to maintain and do our business, also thinking about the kind of human crisis that is evolving, especially now with this war. So it's not an easy discussion. Now, I would say that when I look at what it is that we are doing, it is to get closer and closer closer to our suppliers, because it's not only about managing your own supply chain anymore. It's about collaborating upstream also, and also downstream with logistic companies. But if you take upstream first, really collaborating and understand what is available, and also to make sure that you can adapt your SKU portfolio. So what has happened in our company is that there's been quite some, you can say, changes to the SKU portfolio, because we also see people's buying behavior has changed. And as a result also of COVID, we saw a lot of increase in more convenient product packs, for instance, the can, and of course a big reduction in sales in the on-trade, so in the bars and restaurants, because there were closed downs and lockdowns everywhere, so people would not visit the bars and restaurants. Now, when these things happen, they happen very quickly. So you have really fluctuating demand in the market that is changing. You have logistic hiccups in your outbound chain, and then you have the same kind of problems with your inbound material. So as a producer, you're kind of in the middle of this, and you really have to stay very, very close to your partners in that value chain. And we learned very quickly that we had to be very close with our suppliers, that it was not all about just pushing on price and contracts, but really looking for the best solutions together with them. So really looking for, this is what's available, this is how we can supply you, and then for us to say, okay, let's use that. It's not ideal, I can say, but that's helped us that we have a widespread footprint, as I said in the beginning. So we were able to take materials that were available at many times in different places, and it has helped us that we are very close to market. So we've been able to make rapid decisions in the local organizations to adjust our SKU portfolio. So this has been a benefit to us. But having a close relationship with your supplier and understanding their supply chain multi-tier is crucial. And visibility is one of the things that we might have taken for granted, but that we for sure saw during the start of the COVID crisis, that we did not have good enough visibility into plans, into disruptions, and into availability, and also not to all the logistic flow. So creating that visibility, having that together with your supplier is, I would say, crucial to deal with this situation that we are seeing now.
Now, on the topic that I was mentioning, transferring and skill and knowledge sharing, and you seem to be very good at that. At the same time, I imagine, and knowing a little bit your structure, right, each brewery is fairly unique and locally adapted as well. Are there certain tips and tricks, Magne, on how to ensure this collaboration, this sharing is more successful? Some more case studies. Tell us more.
With the first thing you hear in these discussions, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, but if you work in operation and you go from one place to another, people will tell you, like, but here it works like this, but we are different, but this is different. It might be true from place to place and culture to culture, but there are many things that are the same. So one of the things that we have done is to say, like, let's not address all the actual, say, physical things, but let's try to address the way of working. So we put in place over many years a very standardized approach based on the TPM methodology, where we say, this is how you address problem solving. This is how you address operational instructions, and so on. And in that way, you create a kind of a common language and a common way of addressing things. Now, this is a basis then for sharing and learning from each other later on. So I think we have been quite successful with establishing that. So when you now go from one plant to another, you really see that there is quite some harmonization and standardization in the way that we address things. That does not take away, the fact that many of the problems that they might encounter are maybe related to local portfolio or the local circumstances. But having this basis of a common language and a common way of addressing things has been very, very helpful to us. Now, on top of that, you layer then target setting. So the target setting gets done in the same way for everybody. You can develop tools and best practices that get shared, benchmarking tool, all these things. So from that commonality, you build all the other things. It takes a bit of time, right? So you have to have patience. But when this machine starts working, it is very easy also to transfer people, right? So, we used to have in the past that when a brewery manager was promoted from or moved from one site to another, the first thing he would do is to look around and say, well, we're going to do everything different. This is not the way I do it, right? So, then he started changing everything, and it took a year just to get to a stable situation. Now, I would say that almost any brewery manager from any of our plants can walk into any other plant and he will know exactly how things work. So having this standardization is very, very important.
Looking back on your career, Magne, what would be one principle or one piece of advice that you found most relevant that helped you be where you are today?
Well, Radu, that's a difficult question. I think people are also a little bit individuals, and I am myself. Maybe I'm not a typical supply chain director or supply chain leader. I've had various jobs, both in the commercial side and in innovations. But I think it's important to stay open to new ideas and be creative and curious, right? So for me, that has worked well. I'm a very curious person. I like to explore new things, and I also like to do this with my team. So for me, being a curious and exploratory person, I think has been quite helpful to my career. Now, I'll probably be the first to say that also my career moves have been kind of out of the ordinary, from being a general manager leading markets to being now a chief supply chain officer. It has also given me quite a broad background and the ability to take part of conversations in our executive team levels and also with my colleagues that are in the commercial function. And I think many supply chain officers have been fighting with the fact that executive teams have difficulties in understanding the complexity of supply chain. One thing that I have learned that might be an advice is that supply chain is a collection of many small things. And it's, when you work a lot in supply chain, it becomes kind of second nature to you. You understand the dynamics and how things, when you change something in one piece of the chain, how it affects several tiers down the chain. When you talk with your partners in the executive teams, it's not always easy to bring in all these details because, there's a lot of big issues at the table. So it's taken me some learning to understand that sometimes complicated daily life in terms of all the complexity in the supply chain is not always to be discussed at every table. So trying to distill the messages and the important things to keep the company informed and to get the decisions that you need has been a bit of a learning for me personally. And I think many supply chain directors are struggling with that as well. And it's worth investing some time in that.
No, I love that you made the point. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with Lean Toren, who's the chief supply chain officer of Flex, and exactly the same. It was, how do you communicate? How do you keep it short? Focus on business impact, not on jargon, because boards and CEOs and all of that, they're not they're not into the details and into the supply chain jargon piece. They're into what does this mean for business. So love that you also address that, and it's something that absolutely is needed in supply chain by and large, and more executives hopefully will improve. But also, I will take the opportunity to stress also, I've actually recently shared, I don't know if you've seen it, there was a 1 hour documentary on why supply chains may never be the same, done by Wall Street Journal. By the way, they've done some amazing documentaries to really simplify and explain to the common person in the street like me what supply chain is. And I think all these things, Magne, also matter a lot in this educational of the general population, right? Maybe your parents now maybe know what you do in supply chain. My kids, my daughter said, hey, I know my tablet is late at school because of supply chain. So I think that it's also helped the last 12 to 24 months. If there's one positive, is that people started to hear and more understand what the hell is supply chain.
Yeah, I think even governments started to, politicians talking about this as well. It came with the COVID vaccines, I think, was the first kind of real realization that supply chains are all around us. And we had a lot of discussion and also helped some governments with realizing and setting up their COVID supply chains and also the whole, organizing the vaccinations and all these things, because suddenly supply chain professionals were the ones who were used to dealing with this. So that for sure was something that accelerated the interest and the understanding of supply chain, I would say. For sure.
Let's just hope that they continue to put professionals in this, not without naming again the politicians. So
it makes a bit of a difference,
Pure propaganda versus actually expertise, yes, makes huge difference. Magne, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for the straight, pragmatic case study sharing. Great having you today. Good luck in the next months. Those challenges and problems will definitely keep coming up. Keep doing a great job at Heineken, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Rado, for having me, and good luck with your coming programs. And I'll be listening in every now and then. It is always good to stay informed.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, Of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.